All right. Well, good whatever time of day it is where you are. I am Gib Kerr, and as Alicia pointed out, there is a QR code there. The reason is I want to kind of judge what people's background knowledge is with respect to the material we're going to be working on today. On that note, though, I am Gib Kerr. I am a retired Navy captain, a retired corporate executive, a retired DHS executive, and a retired professor who taught leadership to a bunch of people, particularly senior leaders. The interesting thing is I do a lot of stuff now. Retired people ask me to do things like I am an LPI 360 coach, and that's what I do for one of the things I do for Resources Unlimited. I'm also I do a number of psychometric instruments, but my favorite is the emergenetics profile, which I do a lot of to help with self-awareness and particularly with leaders. I'm also a master trainer for De Bono, if you're familiar with those, with their thinking tools and how to organize our thinking, how to be more creative, how to get more ideas. And Resources Unlimited also does that. Resources Unlimited can get you access to any of these things. And last but not least, I'm also a master trainer for Chart House Learning that does FISH. If you're familiar with FISH, we can talk about that. But look at the array of stuff. Why do I do all those things? And I'll talk to it here in just a second. Just a quick agenda for what we're going to do. Briefly, why are we going to talk about this particular instrument? I'll do a very fast DISC overview. And frankly, for the number of people who are in here, most of us are familiar with DISC and are using it. But then I'm going to talk about the practice of exemplary leadership and the leadership challenge, which was Kuzi and Posner. And let's see, we're going to talk a little bit about leadership inventories. And one of them was that it's now been retired, Wiley's DISC 363, and they've replaced it with the LPI 360 and 360 plus. So we'll talk about both of those very, very briefly, but to give you an idea of what the LPI 360 would look like. And then, you know, why attend these things? So what? And what do we get out of this? We'll give you a couple of thoughts on what we believe you can do with this particular material. Chat is open, so if you want to share your thoughts, I see that Kathy may be connected with emergenetics. Any thoughts in there? We will record or save the chat, and I believe also it's up to Alicia. She can provide you with the slides I'm using today as well.
Yes, I will.
Okay, so subject to that, why this topic? I mean, the pandemic was had an interesting impact on organizations. And having taught leadership and been a senior leader, both as a senior Navy, as a Navy captain and executive, all that kinds of things. The biggest challenge we have with organizations and leadership, and when they get affected by something as dramatic as the pandemic, is self-awareness. We realize we need that. And there's only a 5 gazillion tools you can use to become self-aware. With the leadership team, it's important, in my opinion, that they become sufficiently self-aware, but they can also adapt to what they're seeing and how they interact with organizations. This is one of the powers of DISC and everything else. But my big thing is, how do you combine these tools together to give leaders and even rank and file other folks who are kind of those informal leaders, how do we give them tools to better interact with those with whom they're working? So I will share the poll just to show what our background knowledge is on what we're talking about today. Most everybody here, I've got 11 folks in, most everybody has done, has worked with DISC, everything DISC. Some of you has seen the LPI 360, I'm sorry, the DISC 363, about half of you, so I'll talk a little, very briefly about it. But Kuzi and Posner, some have been exposed, and some of you have seen LPI 360. So as part of my agenda, my DISC will be very quick, just to show you kind of how you might use it in this particular, using this particular instrument. So let me go back to my PowerPoint. Where did my PowerPoint go? There it is. Okay. Okay, so everything DISC, right? Everybody's familiar with this, the 2 dimensions. You know, we go from fast-paced and outspoken, to cautious and reflective. And of course, the other dimensions, questioning and skeptical versus accepting and warm. And then there are, of course, the four quadrants in that model. There's dominance, influence, steadiness, and conscientiousness. The important thing about this is DISC is a behavioral tool. It's a personality behavior tool. As a result, you all know people become more aware. Oh yeah, I'm here. I'm a combination. I'm one of the 12. I have a preferred style, and there are ways that we learn once you understand DISC. Ways to learn to use that knowledge of DISC to help work effectively for those who do not think or behave like we do. I think the brilliance of some of these tools is they give you, this I think comes from one of the handouts that DISC uses, it gives you a way to say, oh, well, if I'm not in that dominance quadrant, I'm not one of those three styles, then how do I work effectively with those? If I'm self-aware as a leader and I understand enough about what makes exemplary leaders, then I can use that knowledge to apply it to each of those four quadrants. So I think when we get to the end, I'll talk about how that would work. But my point being that any of these 360s or these self-awareness tools can be independent of each other, but they inform one another. Okay. So let me talk a little bit about the LPI and the Leadership Practice Inventory and Leadership Challenge. And I want you to think about, real briefly, in your experience, why do people follow? And if you've worked with leadership groups and you ask them that question, often people don't have a very good answer for that until you ask them to think about it. Now, what the research said, I know the Gallup study that was done in 2008 is a little dated, but it has been validated since then. But people follow leaders for these four things: trust, compassion, stability, and hope. Wisdom's not up there, right? Results aren't up there. And what's interesting about those, how do they get to those? They get them through the practices and commitment to exemplary leadership. And once exemplary leaders establish trust, they show compassion, even in a chaotic world generated by a pandemic, a VUCA world, for those who are familiar with that term. It's something that's relatively stable in their life, that they have hope for a future, they'll follow these folks to the end of the earth. So Kuzi and Posner, when they talk about that, developed this theory around what they call the leadership challenge. A little history to the leadership challenge. Well, gosh, it was started in the 80s, so it's over 30 years. The 6th edition just came out in 2018. I highly recommend it if you're into those kinds of things. The cool thing about it is that they have all these associated materials and workshops that you can run in parallel. It was revisited in 2010 when someone says, okay, well, there are these generational differences. So how does this all work with millennials as opposed to baby boomers, for example? And they're in Truth About Leadership, they talk specifically about that. They still see these 5 practices of exemplary leaders, but they manifest themselves differently. What modeling the way looks like to a baby boomer is very different than how someone would model behaviors they want to see in a millennial. Okay, and then last but not least, in 2021, they came out with another follow-on book called Everyday People, Extraordinary Leadership. What's fabulous about this is we all know this from experience. I mean, the old day of hierarchical organizations are pretty much kind of going away. Everybody serves in a leadership role at some point. And so the informal leaders are not the ones that are appointed in an organization. So how do we give them these tools? How do we help them understand what it's like to be a leader? What could help? How do these 5 practices apply to them? So it's I liked it a lot because I work a lot with informal leaders, and there's always somebody else in that group, right, who's filling the role of leadership in some way. And so that one's particularly useful. The leadership practices inventory that measures the practices of exemplary leadership it applies to any kind of leader. It's not just those that are senior in an organization. So their research that they did back in the 80s, validated in the 90s, still using data. There are 5 practices. Model the way, inspire, it's a model the way, but then inspire a shared vision, not just generate it, inspire it. Challenge the process, look at what we need to do to make things work better or easier. Enabling others to act is getting kind of rid of the barriers, and then encourage the heart. And what I want to do is show you the difference between this and some other instruments is that this is talking about behaviors. And it's not describing it doesn't sort people into, well, you're this kind of leader, you're that kind of leader. That's irrelevant to this instrument. What's important to know is that all these practices manifest themselves regardless of how you would characterize yourself as a leader. The interesting thing about the Everything Disc 363 for leaders is that, again, it's kind of sorted you into, well, it's this kind of leader, therefore the world should look like this. I would offer that's up to the individual. Then once they understand what makes exemplary leaders, then how do you make these 5 practices come to life in your organization? I'm going to go quickly through what the practices were. You know, the description, these are all quotes from their material. You know, everybody's a leader. But in Model the Way, it's how you behave that makes all the difference in the world. Now, each of these practices has and model the behavior, have leadership commitments leaders would make. Each of them have 2 for each of the practices. And for Model the Way, it's clarify values, which means find your voice, affirm shared ideals, set the example. I don't need to explain what that means. But my point is, under clarify values and set the example, there are certain behaviors they see in leaders. And so for Model the Way, for example, there are basically 6 predominant behaviors that they see that the instrument now assesses for. So it's looking at, are we seeing these behaviors? What's the frequency we're seeing these behaviors? And if you want to increase the power of your leadership, become more exemplary, then how do you kind of take advantage and leverage those behaviors? So that's what this instrument's about. It's not a descriptor of what we perceive to be how you lead. It is, here are the behaviors that you say, oh, I'm demonstrating those behaviors, but more importantly, this is what other people are seeing. That's what makes it a 360 instrument. So for Inspire Shared Vision, it's all about staying focused in the long term. There are lots of organizations, and I'm sure you've seen it, lots of organizations that do visioning and mission exercises, but they don't live. And they don't live those visions primarily, and they become shelfware because they're not inspiring it. Okay. So exemplary leaders, not only have this vision burning brightly in their brain, but they also have total belief that this can happen, even when the chips are down. And then obviously, and it doesn't matter what your disc style is, how confident are you in the ability to make those things happen is important. So for inspiring a shared vision, the commitments for those leaders are seeing that future, envisioning it, and then being able to describe it. But how do I make it ennobling, something that contributes to the greater good? How do I make that exciting? And again, that's completely independent of your disc style. How you display those things or how you're going to do those things may be a function of a style, but the basic thought is not restricted to any one style. And then how do I get others to participate in that vision, shared aspirations? So challenge the process. And again, to think a little bit about it, we know from neuroscience that nobody accepts a change unless there's a value proposition associated with it that their brain will accept, either with changing how we think or how we behave. So every process every process is involved. We usually invented those processes to prevent recurring bad outcomes or to make things run more smoothly, et cetera. But we do know that all the leadership cases they studied, they had to change something from the status quo. Something had to become better. And so how do I get out in front of this? How do I find what needs to be changed, what I need to challenge, not challenge everything, but let's challenge those processes to see what we might do to make things better. And so I've got to find those opportunities to do that. How do we do that? It's what's that thing in the moment I can go grab, or I'm comparing to other organizations. It's not quite like this, but wait, there's an innovation over here that I might take advantage of. And then we talk about taking risks and experimenting. I was a major program manager both in the government and in DHS and the Department of Defense. And everybody says, well, you got to be willing to take risks. Okay, but those taking risks are never really rewarded very well. And so our culture has become risk adverse. So how do I do that? How do I get my folks to experiment and venture out, take the appropriate risk? And we do that by starting small and working big, right? The common quote we use a lot is, we never called it trial and success, right? It's trial and error. And we learn from those errors. And that's okay to make errors as long as nothing really, really awful happens, because what we learn from that is just as important. So knowing the answer is not being really smart. It's knowing what to do when we don't have the answer, and what do we do to make progress in a little way. And I don't want that to happen to me. So we need to learn from experience, although I'd offer that the best experience is someone else's that I can leverage, and don't let it happen to me. So enabling others to act. And this is about not only sharing the dream, but making those dreams a reality. I think we use this word empower a lot, but I would offer it's that encouragement, it's that it's the kind of being in their head, having their back, that help folks understand that no, we really can do these very difficult things. And so I've got to have that collaborative environment. I've got to have trust. I've got to have relationships. And I work with a lot of technical organizations where you ask them, give me one example where technically we knew this is the challenge. This was the solution that we had. We had the data to support that solution. We even knew how to implement it. But man, nobody was signing on. And what we discovered, and have them discover, oh, wait a minute, there are people involved. And in order to get any of these things to go, I've got to facilitate that relationship to allow my solution to be vested. Any leadership tool will help them understand, well, how do I get them more invested? How do I foster that collaboration? And so the 6 behaviors associated with enable others to act do that by not only fostering collaboration, but helping strengthen others. And you've seen the folks who, oh, that's just so frustrating. I'll do it myself. Well, there's no self-determination there. I don't develop competence there if I'm doing it and everybody is, kind of waiting for that leader to act. So I want to strengthen others. I want to be collaborative. It is about the people, and I'm going to have to shed whatever is getting in the way of those relationships, work on something that helps improve them. And last but not least, I think this is the hardest for a lot of leaders, is how do I encourage the heart? I mean, people get really frustrated in the pandemic, particularly when business models start to get destroyed, the supply chain issues we've had recently. Wow, it can be mind-blowing. And it's this genuine act of caring. And frankly, some styles, caring's not in it, right? The D styles, what does caring look like? So if I want to encourage the heart from one of those different styles, then I need to understand what it looks like for them. But I've got to figure out how I'm going to draw people together. We talk a lot about recognition, and we can talk about instruments to help assess for that. But oftentimes we recognize people in ways that's not how they want to be recognized. So how do we check for that? How do we get inside their heads? How do I do that encouragement piece? And not only encourage them, but you know what? I'm going to use something that's going to help identify the behaviors that says, it's not about the person themselves. It's about what am I seeing, and let's work on that behavior as opposed to it's some kind of defect in the person. No, I want to link rewards to the behaviors I want in the organization. And so how do I do that? It's about recognition, I mentioned before, but it's also about celebration. And I think one of the things that my wife works with schools to help turn schools around. She's a professional learning community expert. And one thing we find is that in organizations, and she does it with schools as well, They, oh, it's a terrible day. I'm just glad I got through it. Well, no, at the end of the day, we're going to find something to celebrate. Well, it was all bad. Well, it wasn't all bad. What's one thing that went right? What's the next thing? And celebrate the little things. And after a while, it says, oh, it wasn't really that bad. So how do you develop the cycle that says, yep, there are some things that were not good today, and we need to prevent those from happening. But then how do I get them? Let's talk about the things that did go well. We'll address those challenges, but we want the positive piece as well, because that's what the brain is looking for. Okay. So that is the fastest version I can ever do of the 5 practices of exemplary leadership. Here's the kind of bottom line of this. Those practices show up in all those DISC styles. And I think kind of the power to them is they just look different. So can you imagine how it would look if someone learned to use those practices regardless of the style with which they're interacting? They know their own. They may or may not know someone else's, but I can adjust how I work those practices to match any of those styles. What that does when you're helping work with someone who's this style different than yours is that, oh, it resonates with them. It generates a value proposition. That leader appreciates it, even though they're a D and I'm SI or whatever, wherever I am on there. It makes I can make a difference with them to help it resonate. So imagine again looking at those 5 practices, model the way. Traditionally, for someone who is one of the D styles, is going to be very directive. But I know I have people in my organization who are in the steadiness quadrant. Well, how do I make it appeal to them? And when you read the behaviors associated with each of the 5 practices, you see, oh, wait a minute. If I'm going to encourage the heart with someone with an S style, it's going to look different than someone who is a C style. Where one side is more about the data and the information, the other side is more about the people. So once the leader has completed an LPI 360, which shows them which of the behaviors people are seeing most frequently or least frequently, and then something about the organization, says, well, the leader can decide whether they want to adjust. Says, no, I want to see more of that. And how do they adjust it? And they can do that based on what they're seeing and what they know about the DISC styles of the people in their organization. So why I say all that is this 360 instrument is complementary to all of that. And it gives you a way to kind of, oh, yeah, I got this awareness, the DISC awareness, so what? Now what do I do with it? I know that I'm engaging in these practices and some of these behaviors, others not so much. I now can make a decision, what am I going to do with that? And I believe kind of the interesting thing about the leadership practices inventory is it's very simple and easy to use. So I want to spend a couple minutes just talking about the inventory itself. The LPI stands for Leadership Practices Inventory. And these are obviously proprietary slides to them, but I've got the copyright and everything on there, so I'm allowed to use them. But here's the trick. It is one of the most widely used 360s. And I think the cool part is not unlike all of them, they have self-instruments and they have a 360 instrument. And what's fun is to watch folks, oh, well, I think I'm doing this and I'm exhibiting these behaviors. But when you get the 360 back, you find, oh, other people aren't seeing that. Why not? And that's when their knowledge of DISC and their styles can help, right? The 30 items I mentioned before are a frequency of behaviors. And so the 30 questions are actually 30 behavioral questions. And so the leader now sees, okay, this is what I think, this is what other people are seeing, and now I can decide if I want to improve on how I'm approaching folks. I think the difference is that there's a lot of research behind the LPI. Kuzi and Posner did it long before they signed up with Wiley. Interestingly enough, the 363 was a Wiley product, but as they got more, I believe this is how it happened, as they got more into the power of the leadership challenge and the 5 practices, that's why I believe 363 is going away, and the LPI is coming more. That's what they're using as their instrument. It's about self-discovery. All these, and again, you'll have these slides. I believe, I'm a nuclear engineer by training, and the methodology they use, the research they used, the willingness to revisit what they did to see, does it really still apply, I think makes it very powerful. And I like the fact that it's simpler than other models. And I'll talk a little bit about that, a little more about that in a second. For the organization, it's getting these leaders to engage more, not only in the experience of the LPI, but getting those positive outcomes for their organizations by working with the people and applying them there. I like the fact that now I'm using a common language. And I've not only am I using a common language, but it's simple enough that I can share the vision of what our goals and values are, and I can rewrite. I can go back and look at our organizational goals and our vision and our mission and write them in terms of what do we want to see behaviorally from our organization. And then, of course, we know from practice, when there is that shared experience, there is that shared vision, if I am seeing repeated goodness in what our leaders are inspiring us to do, then I do get more creative organizations. I do get innovation. I do build trust. And of course, we know, I think the recent research, and some of you probably know better than I, but the cost of turnover, 3 times, 4 times the annual salary to rehire someone you've lost. So how do I retain them? How do I get them to share in all these practices, engage in those behaviors for the organization? And I believe those practices help with that. And then, of course, improve efficiency is common. We know that these things, that the ongoing research going back to the organizations where the LPI has been used, we know that they tend to be more successful and more effective. And I do believe the Wiley website has some examples on there, kind of the testimonials of these things over time. But I think also the Leadership Challenge, the independent website run by Kuzi and Posner, they may have been combined, but again, talk about what people see when they live these positive outcomes. We can talk about that. Here's what we know, and we've been working with a couple of larger organizations. We know that when leaders are self-aware and they want to do something different, they want to change that status quo, they tend to be more engaged. They tend to want to take responsibility. Now, that's not true of all leaders, right? There's some who take an instrument like this, and they kind of do the mental eye roll and says, yeah, I knew all that, so what? That's an emotional intelligence thing. They can decide what they want to do with that. But I think once they've signed on to, now this model is effective, we do see a greater passion, purpose, loyalty to the organization, et cetera. Okay, so what? Why should I use the LPI 360? I put us there. Us is resources unlimited, and I'm one of the people they hire to do these kinds of things. All right, I think it's simpler than other models, really. And there are these 5 practices of exemplary leadership with those on the 6. For each of those, there's 6 behaviors. But if you look at the 363, there were 24 practices in 8 approaches. And what was interesting about the 8 approaches is there were descriptions of leadership styles. Okay, that's great. You described it for me. I agree. But what do I do with that? Now, they did give suggestions at the end, the 3 places for development. But I would offer that because this instrument focuses on the behaviors themselves, a disc itself can describe someone's how they're going to lead. But I want to see if they're engaging in those practices. Okay. I also believe that because it's a simpler model, the reporting is much simpler than the 363. So I see some of you have used the 363. There's a lot in there, an awful lot. I mean, it's not as much as if everybody's done some of the 360s from, for instance, the Center for Creative Leadership. It's like 30 pages of stuff that you got to distill. And I believe the 363 was an improvement on that kind of thing for something that's simple and straightforward. But I believe the LPI 360 has done even better. Kathy's coming back. The CCL has too much sometimes. And if you want to have some experience, I do have experience with coaching people. I coach senior executives in DoD and in DHS, and to get those senior leaders who don't have a lot of time to sit down and read 36, 40 pages, not happening. But if I know their disc style, or I have another tool like emergenetics to help them, I can now limit, okay, this is, work on these things because those are inside kind of your wheelhouse where you have the greatest strength. So I believe that it's because it's independent kind of disc, you can adapt what those behaviors look like. You take those 30 behaviors, those 5 practices, and put them on a disc kind of template, or look at it through a disc lens, and I can apply them in any of those, any of the styles in all 4 quadrants. Now, I think the brilliance also of what Resources Unlimited is doing, you can go off and get these things and start to run them. But the cool thing is that Resources Unlimited, and the reason I work with them, is because they're going to give you the administrative support to help work with that tool, talk you through it, help you establish kind of the culture of using this instrument. But then I'm a certified coach. They have other certified coaches at Resources Unlimited that can help you with that, not only conduct some of those sessions for you, but to help people understand what it looks like, help be that thinking partner that doesn't have a dog in your fight, right? When you do things that are indigenous to your organization, and you're using a local trainer or a local, lack of a better term, an indigenous trainer or an indigenous coach, sometimes there's this little skepticism that says, oh, wait a minute, are you really doing this in my interest, or are you merely, a corporate, reiterating a corporate line? For someone like Resources Unlimited, they're completely independent. Yes, they want you to succeed, but they're not living inside your culture. Yes, there is a coaching report that talks about, that's a good thing someone could do. Does not overlay the disc information. But since a couple of our coaches are also disc certified, we can work through that as you talk about it. And so serving as that bridge, this is coming from Yvonne. Okay. All right. Alicia, I'm sure, is taking note of that. All right. Let's see. So what next? What else can we do for you? Well, what I recommend is decide if the model fits your learning and leadership and development approach. I mean, and I'd ask you, when's the best time to plant a tree? It's an African proverb. The best time is 20 years ago, right? The second best time is today. So if you decide it does fit your model and you want to plant that tree for, I would like to see those exemplary practices in our organization, then talk with these folks. And Alicia is one, I think is the one is kind of the entry point. Tanya Schumann, I don't know if she's, Tanya, you on? No. Is another certified coach, but arrange for a trial, look at some of the sample reports and talk to us about what might work for you and your organization to use something that's a little different. Yeah, we can help with an overlay maybe that matches to what you're seeing in your organization, and talk about how you might want to use that. Okay. Yes, they have their own. Now I got to be careful. Kathy asked, do Kuzi and Posner have their research on their site? The answer is, I'm not sure. I know it's covered in the 8th and the 6th, whatever edition we're on now. I've got it back there somewhere. And they also talk about the research and the validation of it. They have associated with the instrument, they have coaching guides that talk about the research. Yeah, it's a leadership challenge, but there's coaching. There's a coaching books, but there is a bit. I'll go look. I'm fumbling for the answer because I'm not sure. Sample reports. Alicia can get them for you. Tanya can get them for you and show you what they look like, both the individual and group report. When we train people, and I'm one of the folks who do it, train people to administer the LPI 360. We go through those in detail, and not only for the individual and the individual reports, but also the group reports. What does it look like for this group of leaders? What does it look like individually for them? What feedback are they seeing from their organization? But then as a group, what does this leadership team look like? Okay. So let's see what else. Other questions. I know I did that quickly, but everybody was familiar with DISC. And so Yvonne says there is research on the Research Challenger site. That's a good question. Is training required before you use the LPI? Look, you can go buy them. I recommend you don't do it. I don't think we can find out. I believe to conduct the debriefs, you need to be certified. But I don't know the ins and outs of what Wiley structures, because whenever I'm called in, it's because we need someone to help coach or to certify people to administer the instrument. So that's a answer of Yeah, and so for those who Rory's saying I've used it before but do not have official certification. And again, just like anybody can buy DISC, right, and give it. There's no formal certification process. There are people who certify DISC facilitators, but anybody can buy it and use it. I would recommend that you get certified, or you have a certified coach come in and help you set your program up. There's a large group that I think we've done several iterations with them where they wanted to try it, and yeah, I can buy it, but I really want some help me sure this thing goes, because you don't want it to go south on you. You want to be sure it applies. Okay. Other questions? I know I did a lot of talking.
And if anyone does have questions afterwards, feel free to ask me. We can set up a phone call or just send me over an email, and we can always connect with Gib too if you have additional.
Okay. So I know we had an hour, but you folks are all DISC familiar, so that went much more quickly. This is recorded. I'm available through Resources Unlimited. But I think, Alicia, you're also going to send out a survey afterwards. We do, when we do these webinars, we to say, okay, I did that, how did that one work, etc. And we can, we modify things depending on what people say.
Yep, I will include all that in my follow-up email, and then I'll also send some sample reports so you guys can take a look at those.
Perfect.
Great.
Yeah, Yvonne is saying they do have various levels of certification. When I got certified, it was a Facilitator for Leadership Challenge, and it included access to the LPI. Now, and of course, there's the certification to do the workshops, but there's also certification to be a coach, and there's a follow, I think, master, I think is the other one. Okay, and all those, I think, they've also, interestingly enough, because I first started doing these, I don't know, gosh, 8 years ago, 10 years ago, something like that. And the marketing has changed a little bit, particularly when they switched over to Wiley. And so some of the information available during certification, I think, is better than it was back in the day. So I would revisit those materials. I think they completely rewrote them in 2018, maybe 2017. So other questions, and we'll stay on for as long as people want to yak. Okay.
Mary, do you have a question?
I do. I was wondering if we're allowed to talk out loud or if we just have to write in the chat. But
well, no, you can talk out loud. I can't write in the chat to save my life. Yeah.
So anyway, I just have a comment. One of the ways that we've overlaid the LPI is experientially, and having the 4 quadrants out there, and then having I actually have objects that represent, inspiring a shared vision, and eyeball, and a question mark for challenging the process, and use that with people standing in the different quadrants, and then figuring out where do they think, where does this fit. Modeling the way is generally in the middle of those 4 quadrants, right? So, and right. Then discussing. So it's doing it from an experiential perspective has been pretty successful. For people to get the visual and the overlay without having, which was also a question earlier about, is it actually represented that way? So it's just a comment.
No, that's excellent. And I think particularly if you have DISC trainers in your organizations, we know adult learners learn experientially just as well as kids do. And so to provide that opportunity, I think would be excellent. Absolutely. The process of training folks to administer it, depending on, we did a lot of this during COVID, so we had to do it all virtually. The timeline necessary to get some of these folks up to speed, not only in the practices, but in the instrument itself and how to administer it, there wasn't a lot of time to do that kind of, oh, I get it connection to what we call the learn model. But we do follow-on work with these folks. It's okay, now that you got the basics, let's make it more real for you. Okay, not necessarily the first time. First time they're exposed to the 5 practices, that may be almost too much. But then you combine them and start combining with that and other instruments. Okay, thank you, Vaughn. Other questions?
So Gib, I have a real quick question.
Sure.
We exclusively use the DISC 63 survey as a developmental tool for all our leaders. So am I understanding that, that'll be retired, but this new survey is to be used in conjunction with the DISC that all our leaders currently have, or is this new and improved, brand new, and you need a certified person to debrief the report?
It is going to be new to those who have not, and either Alicia may be better to answer that. I think with enough background knowledge, you could add it, to substitute directly. But in order to make the connection for you, so because if they're used to seeing the 363 and now they're seeing this, that overlay that we were talking about earlier, helping someone who's certified and done a number of these things to help make that connection for the first couple of times, you probably want a certified person, or at least at bare minimum, an LPI coach there to help you do that. That's my recommendation.
Yep.
Did I answer the question, or do I avoid it?
So for anybody who's not taking DISC, let's say we have new leaders, right? We have change of leadership, and now somebody, the request comes in and says, hey, I have a new team, and I want, to have them complete a 360 on me, just to see how I'm doing, right? I would steer him to the LPI. He or she would take the survey, and then probably for the first few sessions, until we can get our feet wet or understand how it's delivered, it would be more advantageous for him to have a certified person guide him through it.
Yes, and in fact, I was thinking about this not so long ago. I would have them do the LPI 360 before they did DISC, or before they did imaging, or even Myers-Briggs. I'm certified to do that one too, but I don't care much for it. But yeah, absolutely.
Okay, and then the pricing, is that something that we would just work with Alicia on, like?
Yeah, because remember the pricing that Resources Unlimited does includes that support piece, that Wiley doesn't do, right? So yeah, work with Alicia, and I stay out of that game. That's not my shtick.
Thank you.
Sure. Others. I'm scanning the board. Okay.
All right. Well, if there aren't any other questions, I think we are good to let everyone go. But again, if you do have questions, reach out to me, and I'll be sure to get over those samples to everyone so you guys can take a look at them.
Excellent.
Thank you, Alicia.
All right. Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Gib, for hosting this.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
Gib, am I allowed to ask you one more question? I keep asking for permission.
Absolutely. You want to ask a third one?
Yes, I do. I know so the new version of the Leadership Challenge, which I haven't seen that yet. What would you say the biggest differentiator is from the previous book?
Some of the examples are more modernized. I didn't see a lot of difference. In fact, the instrument itself, the LPI, has not changed.
Okay.
From they changed the image on the front.
Okay.
But the questions, the behaviors are exactly the same as they've always been.
And then the way you stated it in your slides appeared to have a little different angle, and it incorporated the generations, for example, and it had just a little different language. It appeared to me, in your presentation, and that's coming from you, right? Then, or is it coming from that? Okay.
No, it's coming from me because, again, my thing. I'm certified, and I've often been quoted as saying this. I wish I'd had all these tools when I started working with teams in 1974. I would have made far fewer mistakes. So my thing is, okay, I've got a tool. I have opposable thumbs, right? I'm going to take the value from the tool, and I'm not going to break the internet, intellectual property rules. But I want to mush these together to generate the value proposition for the user. It's not just, give them a tool,
Right.
No, a tool without a use is a useless tool. So my thing is combine them. So that's why I added the everyday. I can't remember. I keep forgetting the book, but the blue book.
Okay. Oh yeah, the everyday
people, extraordinary leadership.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay.
And so that, in conjunction with the workbook, I think the other thing that's very powerful is the Leadership Challenge. In each of its iteration, they published a new workbook.
Oh, okay, that's good to know.
Now,
Thank you.
there's a lot of similarities, don't get me wrong. But in fact, at one point, they were, and I have got to go back and look, for each of the practices, they had an individual workbook that you could use. Some of those are available. Yvonne's nodding because she's used them, right? For example, encourage the heart, enable others to act is really hard for some people. And so having that workbook where they have to do the kinesthetic, write it down, what would you do, make it real for them, was the only way it was going to sink in their brain that, I really have to do something different, or I'm not going to be able to personify that particular behavior. Yeah. Adapt your tools.
Thank you.
Sure. I get very excited about these things. I apologize.
You're not the only one, Gib. And Mary, thank you so much for the comment that you made earlier in terms of that kinesthetic way of looking at it. I've done some of that as well. It's just really looking to see that, as I'm certified in lots of different things, but as a practitioner, it's helpful to make that bridge. And so if we're moving to this tool, which I'm very excited about, by the way, it would be helpful to have that additional piece to help make that bridge. Even for people who are not skilled facilitators or are not certified in some of the different areas, though I do understand the value proposition of the fact that there's coaches there that can do that work for you as well.
But creating, I think, to your comment in the chat, Yvonne, creating the Rosetta Stone. I mean, those of us who work in a lot of tools can do that naturally, but that doesn't expand it to the next generation, right? So how do I give them the tools so that we're teaching them to fish, not giving them fish?
And that's really where my comment is coming from. I'm like, I can do that. And it would really be helpful to already have it done so that it's more seamless to the end user. Yeah.
So Alicia, I know, is going to send me some statement of work that says, hey, Gib, would you? No, I'm kidding.
There you go.
And Gib, how can we stay connected with you? Is that a possibility or not so much?
It depends on what you want to stay connected for. Because you can see on there, those are, of those 4 things that are on that slide, 3 of those I worked through Image Genetics, through Resources Unlimited. Fish, we're just starting to do that now. But the typical, what will happen is someone, hey, Gib, we'd like your help to do something. I typically will point them at either Alicia and Tanya, because I'm retired, right?
I'm supposedly retired, but
well, that's what my wife says too.
Not good at it.
So yeah, what I would say is this. For instance, I just got a call yesterday. Hey, Gib, somebody's asking for you through the Image Genetics people, and I said, sure. but Alicia and Tanya both know how to get a hold of me. And if that's something
Okay.
you want.
Thank you.
And the other thing I think that makes us different, again, and you kind of hit on it before, I'm all about making these things useful. There are a lot of L&D learning, leadership learning and development organizations that, and they're run by HR, right? Human resources. And a lot of them says, oh, well, we want that. Well, to what end, right? If I'm also Kirkpatrick trained, if you're familiar with Kirkpatrick training assessments. And a lot of time, we don't think of these things in terms of outcomes we want for the organization and the behaviors we want to see in order to achieve those outcomes. And unless somebody walks them back through that, they're kind of do training for training's sake. And what happens is these tools become one-offs, right? Well, we gave them that and it's not working. Let's try the next one. Well, gosh, did you really link it to their current reality and educate them in a way they could actively use it and think about it and then decide what they're going to do next? Well, no, because that's not, I'm a trainer. Well, I'm not a trainer. I'm a facilitator of fill in the blank. And so that's really what I think we do differently than, and Tanya actually, Alicia's colleague there at Resource Unlimited, some of the times when we get requests then, which says, is that what you really want? It's kind of like the Miracle on 34th Street. Well, you can't get that here at Macy's. You got to go to Gimbel's. Or we can do that. Here's how we could help you do that. So it's more about solving an organization's, need as opposed to want. I mean, there are a lot of organizations, I want this. Well, okay, that's excellent. Why do you want that? And so we help with that conversation. And I do a lot of that. So.
Thank you.
Thank you for the connections. Thank you for your expertise.
Oh,
Really
my
good.
pleasure.
Really great. Thank you.
Excellent. All right. Any others? I see him. Oh, that's Amanda. Hi, Amanda. Not that that's just Amanda. But Rory was there. I have a granddaughter named Rory. Sandra, Ton, anybody else? All right. So Alicia, if you want to, oh, one more message down here. Hang on.
All right, and
You're
thank
very
you guys
welcome.
again for joining us. And Gib, I will chat with you for a little bit afterwards just to go over a couple things.
Why don't you go ahead and stop recording?
All right.